We're going to look at the anatomy of a flower. So we're going to dissect, I have a lily here. We're not going to go through the functions. We're just going to, for the most part, be able to recognize the parts. So this is a flower as opposed to an inflorescence, which we'll do in another video. And this is a perfect flower in that it has all of the parts. The sepals, petals, the male organs, and the female organs. So we'll look at the perianth first. That's the sepals and the petals together. So that's these outer whorls of structures. The sepals are often green, especially when they're before the flower opens, and they protect the flower bud. In this case, the sepals and the petals are the same color, so we call these tepals. So I'm going to get rid of this one leaf, and if we remove the sepals, you can see how they're in an outer layer. Can you see that? Right, so I'm going to remove the outer layer. There's one here, there's one here, and one here. Right, so we have the three sepals. Then we're left with this second whorl or second layer of structure, which are the petals. And if we remove those, you see that we have three of them. So I'm making note of the numbers because that's a diagnostic feature for identifying different species. And the lilies, this is an Asiatic lily, the lilies come in multiples of three. The reproductive parts are in multiples of three. So 3 sepals, 3 petals, right? So now we can look at the male and female parts. Let me hold the camera back just a little bit. Okay. When you do this at home, be careful. If the pollen is ripe, which it is here, you can see it coming out on my finger, it stains. So if we go a little closer, right, you see that it stains. You can see the pollen. And so that'll stain your clothing. So when you do this at home, be careful with this. So this structure here, there's 6 of them. Again, multiples of 3 in the lily. I'm going to pull one off. Right, this is a stamen. So this is the male organ. Right, I'm going to lay them out here. You'll see 6 of them, and we'll take a closer look in just a second. I'm going to pull 3, 4, and 5, 6. Okay. And then this other part here is the carpel or the pistil. This is the female reproductive part. Okay, so let's look at the male first. So the male reproductive part is in 2 parts. You have the filament, which is this long stalk here, and the anther. And the filament is really just a stem to hold up the anther. Right, so the anther is where all the action's happening. The anther is where the pollen is produced. And so depending, we'll learn in class on the different ways the pollen is spread. The form of the plant will show if it needs to be held up for an animal pollinator, if it needs to dangle in the wind for a wind pollinated plant. So if you play around with this, you see how much pollen there is. So this is already a mature anther. It dehisced, it opened, and the pollen is coming out. Let's see if we can get a closer look at that. Second focus. All right, so if you can make out pollen grains on there, this is the anther. And let's see if we cut it open. May not be able to see this because it's already mature, but generally, if you get an immature anther, and you cut it in a cross section like this, you'll see the chambers. This species has 4 chambers where the pollen is produced, and then they split open. And we'll see in class the different ways that they split open. These split open lengthwise, and the pollen comes right out. Okay, so those are the male organs. That's the stamen. There's 6 of them in this lily. And now if we look at the female organ, right, now I'm going to remove it from the stem. So the stem that so here's the stem that the flower was attached to. I'm going to remove it from here. And the point where the carpel is attached to the stem is called the receptacle. It's basically just the tip of the stem that holds up the flower. So this area is called the receptacle. And then I removed the carpel. There's just one in this one. So again, different species of plants are going to have different numbers of reproductive parts. This lily has 1. And this is made up of 3 parts that we label. It's one unit, but the tip of it here is called the stigma, and this is where the pollen lands and then will germinate. This long section here is called the style, and when the pollen germinates, the male sex cells will have to travel all the way down this section, and this is going to be different lengths for different species. Again, if you look at all of these flowers, they'll be very different, but this is a general look at this. So stigma, style, and then this section here is the ovary. And so this bottom section here is the ovary. Let's see if we can get a closer look at that. There we go. And inside the ovary are going to be the ovules and the ova, the egg cells. Okay, so back here, the anthers are producing the pollen, which are the male sex cells. The female sex cells are produced in the ovary. I'm going to cut the ovary open, but this you need a microscope or a magnifying glass to see. So when you're doing this at home, if you do a cross section this way, let's see if we can get a look at this. Lily's a good one because these parts are so big. Is that focusing? If you can get this into focus, you can see chambers in here. It's not quite focused, but if you do a cross section and you look in here, you see chambers, and you can actually see the egg cells. They're fairly large. You can just make them out with the unaided eye. If you have a microscope, like a stereo microscope or a hand lens or a magnifying glass, then you can get a better look at them. And if you want to do that, then you cut this open lengthwise, being very careful with your scalpel here. And when you open it up, we're not going to be able to see it really without some kind of help, but when you look in here and you look along this section right here, you can see the ovules. They're kind of stacked like coins in this case. They're clear looking, so you really need your magnifying glass to look at it. Yeah, this little camera is not going to focus in on that. Okay, so just to review, the entire flower is the entire unit is called a flower. It's the reproductive part of the plant. The lily has a perfect flower. It has all four groups of structures. The outer whorl are the sepals. They protect the flower bud and are often green. In this case, they're white. The second whorl are petals to attract the pollinators, usually colors. Here they're white. They can be, different colors, orange, red. The next whorl are the male sex organs, the stamen with the anther and the filament, 6 of them in this case. And then the final interior structure is the carpel with the stigma, the style, and the ovary sitting on top of the receptacle. And that's it. In another video, we will look at an inflorescence.